Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and a very warm welcome to a special episode we're recording today. I am joined by Ms. Micky Aharonson. She was the head of the Foreign Relations Directorate of the National Security Council in the Prime Minister's office between 2006 to 2014. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us. The impact of this war it's of course a war between Israel and Hamas. But the first thing that a lot of people will be wondering is the overall regional dynamics in the Middle East. We have seen for the very first time there was a deal that Saudi Arabia might come to normalize the relation with Israel, and the Abraham Accords was going at a good pace. And now with this war, how do you see the overall regional dynamics in Middle East change?
First of all, this is an excellent question. I would like to stress this is not a war between Israel and Hamas. Only yesterday we had rockets fired at Israel from Yemen and UAVs that were trying to reach Israel, not for peaceful purposes, as we can understand. There are warnings all over the world, not just quote unquote, against Jews and Israelis. These are warnings against everything Western, everything civilized. And it is like ISIS. They don't just threaten us because we are here. The warnings are around the world. So this is really not a war between Israel and Hamas. And I'm not reaching yet the question of Hezbollah and Shiite militias in Iraq. We are talking globally. If the problem is not addressed here, it will definitely spill over. It is spilling over already. There are, again, warnings all over the world. People that object not to Islam. This is not Islam. This is not the civilized people who believe in Islam. And these are not militants. These are terrorists, and they're out to get everything civilized.
Ma'am, the other important issue that might come up in the discussion is the issue of the Palestinian issue, which we have seen very carefully the Israel government over the last 2 years, especially with when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came first, had the Abraham Accords. He kept the Abraham Accords at the forefront while keeping the Palestinian issue at the back and trying to normalize the relation with the Arab nations. Now, is the Palestinian issue again at the forefront with the war right now?
So I tell you, we have failed here. We all had the concept that we can deal with the Palestinians and we can contain somehow Hamas and his supporters. So we can progress in the region and wait for better days to come with the Palestinians and try to provide them with better living conditions, and that way it could be contained. This concept failed miserably, and I also believed in it, and I tell you, we failed. This cannot go on. My heart goes out to the decent Palestinians who are held hostage by Hamas. We were warning people, you should back off from the border because we are out to get the Hamas people. We will not stop this time. And Hamas actually blocked his own citizens from staying safe. He's using them as human shields to prevent us from attacking him. So I think when you deal with Palestinians and you deal with Hamas, this has to be a completely separate issue. There is a Palestinian Authority, not a very accomplished one, as we know, but my belief is most Palestinians wish to live in peace with Israel. They wish to raise their children. They wish to provide for their families. But there is this group of terrorists that is holding hostage, not only attacking us, Currently, it is attacking them. And I would like to say something about the hospital tragedy that happened in Gaza. The moment we heard of the blast, all the Hamas and Jihad and many, many Western media came out and said, this is Israel that did it. Now we know it is not Israel. We know it is a rocket that was shot from Gaza and hit the hospital. And let me tell you something. I don't know if this was a failed launch. This was one day before the visit of President Biden in Israel. I don't know if those terrorists did not launch the rocket on their own people. You definitely cannot exclude it because what? They are not cruel enough to do it. We're not going to discuss again the horrific, horrific massacre in the south of Israel. So we don't exclude it. So when we deal with Palestinians, again, this is an issue Israel has to address. States in the region have to address. The international system has to address. India should support. But it is important not to forget that these people, again, are held hostages. And this is the only right word to say it by their governing rulers, the Hamas.
We have seen in the last few days as well, not with just Hezbollah, and we saw the Houthis yesterday as well, firing missiles. So, how does this war not have a spillover effect and become a larger issue between Israel and Iran in the longer run?
Well, if you have the answer, this is the $1,000,000 answer. If you know how to do it, I think it will be many leaders would be interested in hearing that. Speaking of hostages, Hezbollah is also holding hostages the people of Lebanon, of course. Everything is directed from Iran. Even if it is claimed that it's Hamas shooting from Lebanon, Hamas would not make a single move in Lebanon without the approval of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has a dilemma. It lost the element of surprise. We are ready now. We messed up really seriously in our south, but we are now ready, both in the south and both in the north. And Hamas has a dilemma because it can cause a lot of damage to Israel, but we can wipe out not only Hamas, but everybody else in Lebanon who supports Hamas. Now it's not just us. We have the Americans' unequivocal support. They have sent forces, airplane carriers to the area. The French and the British governments, the German government support us. Basically, many countries support after what they saw happened in the south. This was not war. This was pure brutal massacre. Maybe we haven't seen something like this for many years. As the American Secretary of Defense Austin said, he knows ISIS very well. This is way worse than ISIS. Now, so the Hezbollah dilemma is whether to extend the war. It is not just Lebanon. Currently, Hezbollah also has forces, as we know, in Syria, and Assad is a puppet of Hezbollah. Assad does what Hezbollah tells him to do. We see also indications of Shiite militias moving from the north of Syria to the south, to the Israeli border. We are ready. He has a dilemma. He lost the element of surprise, but he is very much afraid that if Israel crushes Hamas, Israel will crush Hamas. We don't have any other choice. Containment concept is done, finished. So if we crush Hamas, all our attention would be available for the north. We were not initiating anything, but we get constant provocations from Hezbollah. That was a very Freudian mistake. We get constant provocation. It's beyond provocations. We get attacks. It's not a full-fledged war yet. The question would be, how big is the Israeli entrance into Gaza, I think, and then Hezbollah would have to make a decision. Does it sit still or does it commit suicide, taking all the people around him with it?
And if we move a little bit to another country that I want to talk about before I actually address the Americans and the Russians, is Qatar actually. And it's a very interesting country over here because we saw only with Qatari mediation, the two hostages were released yesterday. It has the Hamas leadership being hosted there in Qatar. So, how long does the American not interfere and have the Qatari mediation to actually release the hostages from Hamas? Because the Hamas gets a significant share of proportion of money from Qatar. So, if the money stops flowing in, I'm sure the hostages might be returned to Israel sooner or later.
So Qatar was involved. Now we hear many countries are involved in the hostages issue. The Russians said they're involved in the hostages issue. It is an interesting point to notice that Hamas chose first to let go of the mother and the daughter who have American nationality as well. They did not choose the Russians, and there are Russian nationalities hostages there. They didn't choose French, but they chose the American one. Qatar is trying to play a constructive role, although it supported Hamas throughout the years, and Al Jazeera, sponsored of course by Hamas, is playing a very poisonous, toxic role, still talking and saying things in support of Hamas despite this inhuman massacre. I think Qatar has to be very careful in terms of uh, when the connections that Qatari institutions, maybe private institutions, are realized to Hamas. I think it could cause a great embarrassment to Qatar. But many countries are trying to play a relevant role. If I can relate to the United States, no doubt, United States reasserted its power in the area. It stressed the fact that it supports its allies in times of need. It stresses its strong position. The Russians were mocking the Americans all the time that they abandoned their allies in times of need, like Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, when there was a revolt against him. And now America is standing extremely strong on the side of Israel, showing again unequivocal support. Now, the interesting thing is the states of the normalization with Israel, the Abraham Accord states, and the states that have complete normalization, half normalization, quiet, under the table normalization with Israel, they are identified with the American apparatus, American pro-American in the area. If they choose to completely be against Israel, this would be considered like divorcing the United States, and therefore they would be also very hesitant to do that. They don't support Hamas. They support the Palestinian people. Nobody supports Hamas. They actually expect us to do the work and eliminate Hamas because nobody wants these terrorists in his country or around his borders. And the equation is when Israel eliminates Hamas, more countries would feel at ease to be closer to Israel. Take Saudi Arabia, for example. This is very interesting. Official declarations by Saudi Arabia are extremely balanced. I think the question whether they restart the normalization with Israel depends on how strongly we go down on Hamas. The more we crush Hamas, I think the faster the normalization with Saudi Arabia will be. Countries don't make agreements with weak states; they want to make them with agreements with strong states, and they're waiting to see what it is.
And it's pretty interesting that a series of high-profile visits from U.S. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and this week we saw actually President Biden visit as well. Is it also in US's own interest that we see they can't afford to lose Israel because that's the only strong hold that US have in the Middle East region?
Well, we say repeatedly, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but I believe there are countries in the region that can create this alliance against everything which is brutal and all the terrorists, and we can create an alliance. So we can try and we need to have an alliance. Israel cannot do the work for the whole Middle East. So it is, of course, this event really reasserts the alliance between Israel and the United States. In the last months, with the internal problems in Israel, questions arise about the bond between Israel and the United States. Now, I think all these questions are gone. As you said very correctly, we see many visits of the most prominent American leaders coming here, of course, President Biden, and showing extreme support for Israel. We share the same values with the United States. Therefore, the bond between Israel and the United States does not depend on this government or the other. It is not neither in Israel nor in the United States. It is a strong bond, and I think now is the best example for it. We are in a time of war. I mean, the worst situation we faced since the establishment of Israel. And the Americans come and support us, and it is in their interest because we are, again, it's like brotherhood. There is no difference whether this government is in power or another.
Now, I want to come a little bit to Russia's stance on this. How has Russia's response to the conflict between Israel and Hamas been characterized in relation to the particular onslaught of crimes that have been committed on Israelis, actually? And do you think after the war gets over, Israel will be drawn much closer to Ukraine because of the support that Ukraine has shown over Russia?
Ukraine has shown complete support for Israel, as again the majority of the states that expressed support for Israel. The Russians. It took a few days for President Putin to contact Prime Minister Netanyahu. Their declarations are, I wouldn't call it even balanced, because they say they are against the murder of innocent people, but what is a murder of innocent people? Though our people were butchered, slaughtered in the south. Women were raped, babies were beheaded. This is not something you can think, is it cruel or not? This should be condemned in the worst manner possible. So the Russian media expresses a lot. There's a lot of expressions against Israel. I would take it even further. There are a lot of expressions against Jews. All these anti-Semites crawl from their holes, come out to express their opinions. By the way, this is very much against the Russian leadership. Throughout the years, used to say that it would never let any harm come to Israel, also because there are so many Jews that came from Russia, including myself, by the way. So it would never let anything harm come to us. Let me tell you, when we hear the missiles blow over our heads, some harm can come to us. And I'm sitting in the center of Israel. So just I'm mentioning this as an anecdote because, you have to put your mouth where your money is and your money where your mouth is. Apologies. Now, Russia, there are questions that arise regarding Russian involvement with Hamas. Russia does not recognize Hamas as a terrorist entity. Russia hosted Hamas many times in the last few years, trying to promote whatever, and the excuse of promoting internal cooperation in the Palestinians. Definitely, Russia does not lose from this war for a few reasons. Because the attention, the international attention, is drawn from the Ukraine arena to Israel. And there are sayings, how can you support Ukraine if you have to support the United States? You have to support Israel. Don't worry, United States is strong enough, as President Biden said, to support everybody it wishes to support. Also, if the agreement with Saudi that is stuck now would progress, the normalization with Saudi, it could, as was on the media, for example, produce more oil. If it would produce more oil, prices of oil would probably drop, and that would have an immediate effect on Russian budget. And I think another interesting point is that Israel is perceived as a proxy of the United States. Now, Russia cannot confront the United States. The imbalance of power is very obvious. But if Israel is bleeding, it is perceived as if the United States is hurt. So, in this sense, I think the Russians, it's time for them to come out and state more clearly that they are against the brutality of Hamas. And remember that these terrorists will not stop at our borders. They should be very, very concerned at what is happening inside the borders of Russia. It's a huge state. They have militants there, they have terrorists there, and they should worry very much on what happens in this sense in Russia.
Also, if you notice, even China has taken a very similar stand. It has failed to call the Hamas attack as an act of terrorism. It has mentioned that it supports both Israel and Palestine and it's ready to mediate. So, what's your take on how the Chinese have reacted so far in this conflict?
The Chinese take a very neutral role, allegedly, but they would have to choose because now the demonstration of power by the United States in this region is so obvious, so strong. Uh, it is better to cooperate in a positive coalition and not to fight this the coalition that is led clearly by the United States. Now, I don't want to get into the U.S. China relations, but yes, the China is hosting the people that we see as terrorists. So they would also have to choose. Israel, of course, wishes to maintain very good relations with China. China is a very strong power economically and other, but China would at some point have to choose, like all the countries, who it aligns with the people who slaughter babies or with those who are trying to fight them.
So, one last thing that I'll ask you before I let you go, something very closer to home as well, that the India Middle East Economic Corridor, which has been the talk of the international table and a lot of conferences, even Prime Minister Netanyahu actually went to the UNGA and spoke about it. And this was seen as a normalization where it was not only connecting India with Middle East and Europe, but also Arab state with Israel actually. So, do you think this conflict will potentially impact the progress of the corridor project, and what broader implication it might have for the region, including India's collaboration with both Arab and Israel?
Well, right now, of course, everything is stuck. Everything that has to do with progress and development and growing economies, these people are not just killing people, they are killing economies, they are killing every move forward. They are trying to harm and to take us back to I don't know, to a caliphate of ISIS. Now, I'm trying to be optimistic because this is a beautiful plan. This could grow all the countries involved: India, Israel, the Arab countries. It's a win win. It's a lose for those who are fighting it, who we are fighting right now. And I'm trying to be optimistic. There is a concept by dictatorships that if they employ an excessive amount of force, a brutal amount of force, like was used in our South, they would make us come kneel to them and beg them to stop. Dictatorships don't understand democracies. Democracies, once they are faced with such brutal powers that try to block all kind of developments, like you mentioned, will use extreme means to prove that in such a brutal use of force is ineffective. And I would like to think that this is also the case. We couldn't have faced a worse disaster in the south. We will not come kneeling. We will chase, and those who we don't take in captivity, we would eliminate every single one of Hamas. We wouldn't let them not just not hurt our people. We wouldn't let them hurt all these programs which you mentioned about the corridor in the area, because we believe this is a better future, not just for Israel, it is for India and it is for the Arab countries. And this dictatorship in particular miscalculated. And I'm optimistic. I hope one day, not so far in the future, we can see this happen.
Yes, ma'am. Well, that's all the question that I had. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to
Thank
us.
you. Thank you. Thank you.